Hello everyone, and as always, welcome to my channel. My name is Marlene. I talk about my own recovery, about eating disorders, and everything related to healing the relationship with your own body, with food, and with movement. And I came across a few studies and I wanted to talk about this topic so badly because it affects a lot of people with eating disorders. A lot of people know the issue and a lot of people know the struggle and they don't understand themselves. And the topic today is body dysmorphia disorder, short BDD. So in this video, I'm going to refer to body dysmorphia or body dysmorphia disorder as BDD, just so you know what I'm talking about. And BDD is something, as I just said, that is very, very common in people with eating disorders. Not everyone who has an eating disorder has BDD, but it is a very common side effect, if you will. But we're actually going to talk about the brain and like all the scientific backgrounds behind this disorder a little bit more so that you get a better understanding if it's really a side effect, if it's a separate diagnosis, and everything you need to know. And I'm also going to explain to you why your brain is lying to you and why you cannot see yourself the way other people see you. So that might be a little bit helpful for the ones of you that really struggle with their body image, because again, people can tell us so often that we don't look the way we think, that we look fine, that we're not ugly, but we won't believe it. And the fact is, we actually cannot see it. If you want to stay until the end of this video, I'm also going to talk about what you can do if some of your loved ones struggle with BDD and how to react and also how not to react. But let's dive right into the topic. As always, I'm trying to make the science as understandable as possible. I'm gonna link in some pictures of the brain, so when I'm talking about like certain brain areas that you understand what I'm talking about. But I really want to make these scientific topics as understandable for you as possible, because they actually helped me a lot in my recovery, because again, it can be super helpful to understand that your brain is just working a certain way and that it's not you being crazy. So before we start, I just want to go over a definition what BDD actually is, or what it can involve. Of course, someone who has BDD doesn't have to have all those symptoms, but people with body dysmorphia disorder oftentimes see their body way different than it actually is. And that can include thinking about the perceived defects for hours every day and like not being able to concentrate because you just think about how your body or your face looks like. It can also include worrying about the failure to actually match the physical perfection we see in the media, on Instagram, or even in other people around us. Dysmorphia oftentimes involves distress in the preoccupation and also constantly asking your loved ones for reassurance but then not believing the answers. BDD also involves constantly looking at your reflection, taking pictures, or avoiding it. And that can even be the case in the same person. So sometimes we look in the mirror all day long and try to camouflage or fix the defect that we're seeing. And on other days, we just like avoid mirrors and pictures completely. A lot of people with BDD actually struggle with over-exercising, dieting, with a lot of makeup, or even with surgeries and like trying to fix the defects that they perceive in themselves. BDD can lead to avoiding certain situations where your body or your face will be seen. It can even be so bad that people won't leave the house anymore because they feel that they are so ugly that they just don't want to be seen. A lot of people take great pains in order to camouflage those defects. So whether it's dieting, over-exercising, surgeries, or even other unhealthy things just to camouflage or trying to fix the defects. So I've been there for sure. I did so many things to my body, I did so many things to my face in order to try to fix the defects that I was perceiving. And oftentimes it involves picking, squeezing certain skin parts, or like picking apart the skin in your face, trying to make your eyes look bigger, your nose look smaller, or wherever you see a defect in. And all these behaviors and the backgrounds of BDD oftentimes lead to depression, anxiety, and even suicidal thoughts. And at this point, I just want to do a little disclaimer. I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a psychologist, and all the tips and hints and everything I'm giving you in my videos come from research, personal experience, and the training I'm doing. But if you struggle with these things, please seek professional help, because there's definitely ways to handle BDD, and there's definitely ways to handle depression, anxiety, and even suicidal thoughts. Just know how serious these topics are, because I've certainly been there myself. And again, like watching videos and informing yourself is great, and it's an amazing way if you want to change things. But please don't hesitate to seek help, because again, these are like very, very serious topics, And I just want to make sure that everyone is fine out there. So if you struggle with these topics, please seek help. So the areas that can be affected by BDD is actually your whole body, whether it's your face, whether it's like certain facial parts, like your eyes, your nose, your lips, like actually everything in your face, or same thing with your body. So it can be like certain body parts, it can be the size of your body overall. And a little side note over here, even though a lot of people with BDD perceive their bodies as too big, BDD can also occur the other way around. So many people actually also see their bodies as too small, want to have more curves, bigger boobs, something like this. So BDD has no standard, but due to today's society and the culture we're growing up in, it is more common to perceive your body as too big than to perceive it as too small, which says a lot about our culture as well. For many people, actually symmetry is also a big problem. So if they feel like their face is not symmetrical or even their body is not symmetrical, they can also suffer a lot. The diagnosis of BDD can be very difficult because, first of all, oftentimes there's too little understanding in body dysmorphia. So a lot of professionals actually just don't know about it or don't know that it's its own diagnosis. And second of all, it oftentimes comes with other disorders. So for instance, a lot of people with eating disorders also have body dysmorphia. And the question oftentimes is, what was there first? Was it the eating disorder or was it body dysmorphia? Because oftentimes it's actually very hard to tell. And same thing with depression or anxiety. So many people don't have enough understanding about it, and sometimes it's hard to tell what was there first. But as I always say, if you suffer from it, if you're diagnosed or not, you deserve help, and there is help out there. So when we're going over the science later, I will talk a lot about the different parts of the brain, which will give you a better understanding about BDD, and you will see that there is definitely help out there. So I've been reading a lot of studies about body dysmorphia disorder, and one thing they all had in common was that patients with BDD have too little serotonin in their brains, which is similar to depression. So serotonin is a hormone, and if you have an imbalance in this hormone, it can lead to depression, but as we can see, it also can lead to other disorders. But oftentimes there's more, and let's look into those studies a little bit further. There was a very interesting study from 2013, which was processed with fMRIs. If you don't know what fMRIs are, here's a little picture. You've probably seen those machines. So this fMRI study was taking a closer look at the brains, and they had a control group with like healthy controls, and then they had a group with people who suffer from body dysmorphia disorder. And in nearly all of the BDD patients, you could see a higher activity in the left side of the brain, which is responsible for more detailed procession, higher activity in the right side of the brain of the healthy control group, which is responsible for the more general and holistic picture. So that tells us that people who have BDD and whose left side of the brain is more active process things more detailed when it comes to their vision. So they take a closer look at details, as for instance their nose instead of their whole face. Something that was also very interesting to see was that patients with BDD also had a higher activity in the parietal lobe of their brain and in other visual regions. And that is the same case in patients with anorexia. So again, it is very hard to tell if anorexia was there first or if BDD was there first, but this knowing alone actually tells us a lot about BDD. There was another study using neuroimaging, and it showed that people with BDD had more white matter in their brain. White matter is the tissue that transmits signals between different parts of the cortex in your brain. Patients with BDD also showed a smaller gray matter overall, but more gray matter in the visual regions, which actually goes back to the other study that also showed more detailed processing in visual regions. So we definitely have an asymmetry here when it comes to the visual processing and the other parts of the brain. Patients with BDD also had a smaller orbitofrontal cortex. And the interesting part was that the longer they had BDD, the smaller the cortex was. And again, we don't know what comes first. It's kind of like our chicken and egg problem, right? So we don't know if BDD actually leads to the shrinking of certain areas because we don't use them as often because other areas are actually hyperactive and are used way more than in healthy control groups, or if the shrinking actually leads to the worsening of the symptoms. And something that is also very interesting to look at is that patients with anorexia tend to have shrinking gray matter in their brains as well, because malnourishment actually leads to shrinking in the brain. And I know it sounds scary. It was the case for me. I remember I did some brain studies when I was in the depth of my eating disorder, and my brain matter definitely shrunk. So we know that malnourishment can lead to the shrinking of a brain. The good point is that in many cases it actually can recover again, but the longer we malnourish ourselves, the worse it gets, and in some cases it actually can't be healed again. So that just as a side note. But the interesting part is that, again, oftentimes if we see eating disorder patients who have been malnourished for a very long time, their gray matter actually shrinks. And we don't know if the shrinking of the gray matter actually also leads to certain symptoms of BDD or if it's the other way around. Something I also want to tackle on here is that if we malnourish ourselves or if we avoid certain food groups completely, which is often the case in eating disorders, our hormones and our complete system gets out of whack. So our hormones, for instance, can also lead to stability, to emotional regulation, and all these things. So if we already struggle with BDD and we also have hormones that are out of whack, it can also worsen our BDD symptoms, which is why so many people, once they start gaining weight, actually have less body dysmorphia symptoms and actually get a more realistic look at their bodies, which is quite interesting because when I first started gaining weight, I was convinced that the more weight I would gain, the worse my BDD would become. Because if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? You don't like your body already when it's super small, so why would you like it when it's bigger? But actually the opposite was the case for me. The more weight I gained and the longer I stayed in a healthy weight range, the more realistically I could see my own body. So this is something to actually keep in mind because this is something that can hold people back from recovering. Because they feel like, I already hate my body so much, why would I change it? I will just hate it more, when oftentimes the opposite is the case. Studies also showed the genetical predispositions for BDD, but it's the same thing here. It's often hard to tell if something like anorexia or also body dysmorphia disorder was actually genetically predisposed, or if, for instance, somebody grew up with parents that were constantly picking their bodies apart. So the children grew up with people who didn't like their bodies, and so they learned that behavior. And the same thing goes for trauma. A lot of people with trauma actually experience eating disorders or BDD, but oftentimes it's hard to tell if the trauma actually worsens the symptoms or if the symptoms come from the trauma, for instance, because someone was bullied, somebody said something mean about their body, and then it became BDD. So, as I said earlier, body dysmorphia disorder can be healed. In many cases, it actually can be healed once you start nourishing your body, because that also has a psychological background of finally taking care of your own body. As long as you diet, as long as you over-exercise, and as long as you're hurting your body in order to try to fix your body, you show your subconscious mind that something is wrong with your body. Once you start resting, eating, and stop trying to fix those defects, which are not defects, by the way. Once you start doing that, you show your subconscious mind that everything is fine with your body. And believe it or not, your subconscious mind has a huge impact on your brain as well. So if you start showing your subconscious mind that there's nothing wrong with you, it will slowly but surely over time rewire your brain, and this will lead to lessening of the symptoms. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I also want to say something to people whose loved ones struggle with BDD. And I also want to be completely honest with you guys. I'm not completely free of BDD. I have days where I look in the mirror in the morning and 2 hours later I see my body completely different. And of course that can have to do with lighting, it can have to do with different mirrors, it can have to do with an angle. Oftentimes also the case if you've eaten or not, because believe it or not, but when you get up in the morning and you haven't eaten yet, you will perceive yourself mostly more negative than after eating, which also surprises a lot of people. So I definitely had days in my recovery where I didn't eat as much for whatever reason, and I thought once I eat I will feel only worse, but the opposite actually was the case. It also has to do with your hormones and with a lot of other things in your body. That being said, if your loved one struggles with BDD, it can be extremely exhausting. I definitely get that, even though I myself struggled and still struggle with BDD. I also have people in my environment and people that are very close to me who don't see themselves the way I see them. And some of them also struggle with BDD. And it can be exhausting and can it oftentimes actually makes me very sad, because I often think if you could only see yourself with my eyes, you would see how beautiful you are to me. Beautiful from the inside, but also from the outside. But of course, that's not the case. You can't give somebody your eyes, unfortunately. But what's very important is to listen to them, not downplay their concerns, because oftentimes, for instance, if I would ask somebody, hey, do I look ugly? And they would react annoyed and they would be like, oh, no, I told you already, you're not looking ugly. It would only make me feel worse. And then I would think that my character is also false because I asked these questions and then I'm annoying. So it's very, very important to listen to them, to, respond to their questions without being annoyed, but also to ensure them that there's nothing wrong with it. But at a certain point, it can also be helpful to be like, hey, let's concentrate on something else. I really like you the way you are. You look beautiful to me. There's nothing wrong with you. But let's stop talking about this topic and concentrate on something else. So it can be a very small line, because of course you don't want to, just not listen to their concerns. But at the same time, you also don't want to focus on it too much. So it's of course always your decision if you want to talk to somebody about it or not. But I just want to say, a lot of people actually really struggle, and they look at themselves, they look at pictures, and they perceive themselves different every single time. And them asking or saying something like, oh my God, I'm so ugly, is not fishing for compliments. It's actually what they really see. And it's their cry for help and their, cry to try to change something and to sometimes express their feelings, because oftentimes we don't do that. Oftentimes we feel a certain way. And I actually recently had a situation where I was not happy with my reflection in the mirror and not happy with my reflection on the camera and with what I would see in videos and pictures. And I would just slowly and constantly get more mad at myself, and I would be completely quiet. I wouldn't talk anymore, and I was in such a bad mood until somebody who's very close to me was like, what is going on? Did I do something wrong? So oftentimes it can be helpful to talk about it and to be like, I'm so sorry, but today I'm just very triggered by my own reflection, to try to explain it to people. And again, if you are a person who's with someone or who has friends, family members that struggle with BDD, listening can be very helpful. Stop making jokes about it, because I've definitely been there. I've had many people making jokes about my insecurities. And yes, I'm a big fan of humor, and oftentimes humor can be very healing. But in that case, oftentimes it's not the case. It would actually make me feel more insignificant. It would make me feel more insecure. So this oftentimes is not the right way. Of course, I'm not gonna tell you how to react to your loved ones. You know them way better than me. But this is just my little hint. So overall, I really hope that this video helped you. I hope it helped you to understand your own brain a little bit better. And I also hope that it inspired you to pursue recovery and to continue to recover, because the more you recover, the longer you stay in recovery, the more your brain will recover as well, and the more you will become healthy. And the healthier your thoughts become, the healthier your subconscious mind becomes. And one day you will maybe wake up and look in the mirror and don't hate yourself anymore, and stop picking yourself apart. And again, I just know that it can happen. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in a lot of other people. So please don't give up. And I really hope this video helped you. Let me know in the comments if you like the topic, if you like the video, and also if you like the style of me bringing in scientific backgrounds. So as always, if you have any other questions, if you have any other topics you would like me to talk about, please let me know in the comments as well. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for bringing this channel to 200 subscribers already. So you're slowly but surely seeing me growing, and I can't wait to hit higher numbers. But most importantly, I can't wait to put out more content for you guys. I really hope it helps you, and I wish you a wonderful day.